Namaste, beautiful people. Today I would love to share with you a couple of rules about a proper healthy nutrition, because all health starts with what we ingest. Back in high school, I used to have a severe case of acne on my face and on my back, and trying this type of remedy, trying that type of remedy along the years came to no result whatsoever. Then I decided to become a vegetarian by quitting meat, quitting the consumption of milk and yogurts. And bada bing bada boom, in a matter of a couple of months, gradually my skin became clean as a whistle. Compared to Taoist concepts of balance, the Western notion of a balanced diet is a simplistic and superficial one. Western physicians advise everyone to take a little bit of everything in every meal, jumbling together such disparate ingredients as meat, milk, starch, fat, and sugar. Such indiscriminate consumption of food is no different than pouring a combination of gas, oil, alcohol, and sugar into the gas tank of a car. These blends will not burn efficiently, will provide little power, and will quickly clog the engine so badly that the entire system grinds to a halt. Now let's have a look at the different combinations of food and their effects in your body once digested in that combination. Protein and starch. This is probably the worst possible combination of foods to mix together at a single meal. And yet it is the mainstay of modern Western diet. Meat and potatoes, hamburgers and fries, eggs and toast, etc. When one consumes protein and starch together, the alkaline enzyme Ptyalin pours into the food as it's chewed in the mouth. When the masticated food reaches the stomach, digestion of starch by alkaline enzymes continues unabated, thereby preventing the digestion of protein by pepsin and other acid secretions. The ever-present bacteria in the stomach are thus permitted to attack the protein, and putrefaction commences, rendering nutrients in the protein food largely useless to you, and producing toxic wastes and foul gases, including such poisons as indole, scatol, phenol, hydrogen sulfide. If that is the case, you may well wonder, then why does the stomach have no trouble handling foods that naturally contain both protein and starch, such as whole grains? There is a great difference between the digestion of food, however complex its composition, and the digestion of a mixture of different foods. To a single article of food that is of starch-protein combination, the body can easily adjust its juices, both as in strength and in timing, to the digestive requirements of the food. But when two foods are eaten with different, even opposite digestive needs, the precise adjustments of the juices to the requirements becomes impossible. So here's the rule. Eat concentrated proteins such as meat, fish, eggs, and cheese separately from concentrated starches such as bread, potatoes, and rice. For example, eat toast or eggs for breakfast, the hamburger patty or the bun for lunch, meat or potatoes for dinner. The next incorrect combination of foods is protein and protein. Different proteins have different digestive requirements. For example, the strongest enzymatic action of milk occurs during the last hour of digestion, whereas on meat it occurs during the first half, and on eggs somewhere in between. It is instructive to recall the ancient dietary law which Moses imposed on his people, forbidding the simultaneous consumption of milk and flesh, for a reason. Two similar meats such as beef and lamb, or two types of fish such as salmon and shrimp, are not sufficiently different in nature to cause digestive conflict in the stomach and might thus be consumed together. The rule is to eat only one major type of protein at a single meal. Avoid combinations such as meat and eggs, meat and milk, fish and cheese. Ensure the assimilation of the full range of vital amino acids by varying the types of concentrated proteins taken at different meals. Now let's have a look at starch and acid. Any acid food taken together with starch suspends the secretion of ptyalin, a biochemical fact of life upon which all physicians agree. Therefore, if you consume oranges, lemons, or other acid fruits, or acids such as vinegar, combined with starch, no ptyalin is secreted in the mouth to initiate the first stage of starch digestion. Consequently, the starch hits the stomach without the vital alkaline juices it needs to properly digest, permitting bacteria to ferment it instead. A single teaspoon of vinegar, or its equivalent in acid, is all it takes to entirely suspend the salivary digestion of starch in the stomach. The rule here is to eat starches and acids at separate meals. For example, if you eat toast or cereal for breakfast, skip the orange juice, as well as eggs. If you're eating a starch-based meal of rice and noodles, avoid vinegar, as well as concentrated proteins. Next up is protein and acid. Since protein requires an acid medium for proper digestion, you'd think that acid foods, or Coca-Cola, would facilitate protein digestion. But that's not the case. When acid food enters the stomach, they inhibit the secretion of hydrochloric acid, and the protein digesting enzyme pepsin can work only in the presence of hydrochloric acid, not just any acid. Therefore, orange juice inhibits the proper digestion of eggs, and the strong vinegar dressing on salads inhibits the digestion of steak. Now, as a rule, avoid combining concentrated proteins and acids at the same meal. Protein and fat. In MacLeod's Physiology of Modern Medicine, we find a fact accepted by all physicians. Fat has been shown to exert a distinct inhibiting feature on the secretion of gastric fluids. For 2 to 3 hours after the ingestion of fat, the concentration of hydrochloric acid and pepsin in the stomach is sharply decreased. This delays the digestion of proteins taken with the fat, and this gives the bacteria ample opportunity to putrefy the protein. This is why fatty meats such as bacon or marbled steak or lean meat cooked in fat stays so heavily in the stomach even after hours of ingestion. The rule here is to eat concentrated proteins and fats as separate meals. if you cannot avoid mixing them, be sure to eat plenty of raw vegetables to assist them in digestion and passage. Protein and sugar. All sugars, without exception, inhibit the secretion of gastric juices in the stomach. That's because sugars are not digested in the mouth nor in the stomach. Instead, they pass further into the small intestine for assimilation and digestion. When consumed in combination with proteins, like cake after a steak, not only do the sugars inhibit digestion of the protein by suppressing gastric secretions, the sugars themselves get trapped in the stomach instead of moving swiftly to the small intestine. And this delay permits bacteria to ferment the sugars, releasing toxic gases, which further impair digestion. The rule here is to avoid consuming sugars and proteins at the same meal. Next category is starch and sugars. It has been established that when sugar enters the mouth along with starch, the saliva secreted during mastication contains no Ptyalin, thereby sabotaging digestion before it reaches the stomach. Furthermore, such a combination blocks passage of sugar to the stomach until the starch is digested, causing it to ferment. The byproducts of sugar fermentation are acidic, which in turn further inhibits digestion of starches, which require alkaline mediums for digestion. Bread, which is a starch, and butter, which is a fat, they're a perfectly compatible combination, starch and fat. But when you spread a spoonful of honey jam over the buttered toast, you introduce sugars to the blend, which interfere with the digestion of the starch in the bread. The same principle applies to breakfast cereal sprinkled with sugar, heavily frosted cakes, sweet pies, and so forth. The rule here is to eat starches and sugars separately. Melons are such a perfect food for humans that they require no digestion whatsoever in the stomach. Instead, they pass quickly through the stomach to the large intestine for assimilation and digestion. But this can happen only when the stomach is empty and melons are eaten alone, or in combination only with other fresh foods. When consumed with or after other foods that require complex digestion in the stomach, melons cannot pass into the small intestine until the digestion of other foods in the stomach is complete. So they sit and stagnate instead, quickly fermenting and causing all sorts of gastric distress. As a rule, eat melons alone or leave them alone. Next up is milk. Now we come to one of the most controversial and misunderstood items in Western diet. Orientals and Africans have traditionally avoided milk, except as a purgative. But in the Western world, people are told to drink milk every day throughout their lives. If we look at nature, we see that the young feed excessively on milk until weaned away from it with other foods. The natural disappearance of milk digesting enzyme lactase from the human system upon reaching maturity proves that adult humans have no more nutritional need for milk than adult tigers or chimpanzees. Though milk is a complete protein food when consumed raw, it also contains fat, which means that it combines poorly with any other food except itself. Yet adults today routinely wash down other foods with cold milk. Milk curdles immediately upon entering the stomach, So if there is other fruit present, the curds coagulate around other food particles and insulate them from exposure to gastric juices, delaying digestion long enough to permit the onset of putrefaction. Therefore, the first and foremost rule of milk consumption is drink it alone or leave it alone. Today, milk is made even more undigestible by the universal practice of pasteurization, which destroys its natural enzymes and alters its delicate proteins. Raw milk contains active enzymes lactase and lipase, which permit raw milk to digest itself. Pasteurized milk, which is devitalized of lactase and other active enzymes, simply cannot be properly digested by adult stomachs, and even infants have trouble with it, like my niece, bless her heart, as evidenced by colic, rashes, respiratory ailments, gas, and other common ailments of bottle-fed babies. The lack of enzymes and alteration of vital proteins also renders the calcium and other mineral elements of milk largely unassimilable. During the 1930s, Dr. Francis M. Pottinger conducted a 10-year study on the relative effects of pasteurized and raw milk diets on 900 cats. One group received nothing but raw whole milk, while the other was fed nothing but pasteurized whole milk from the same source. The raw milk group thrived, remaining healthy, active, and alert throughout their lives. But the group fed on pasteurized milk soon became listless, confused, and highly vulnerable to a host of diseases and chronic degenerative ailments normally associated with humans, including heart disease, kidney failure, thyroid dysfunction, respiratory ailments, loss of teeth, brittle bones, liver inflammation, etc. But what caught Dr. Pottinger's attention was what happened to the second and third generations. The first offspring of pasteurized milk group were all born with poor teeth and small, weak bones, a clear-cut sign of calcium deficiency, which indicated lack of calcium absorption from pasteurized milk. The offspring of the raw milk group remained healthy as their parents. Many of the kittens of the third generations of the pasteurized milk group were stillborn, while those that survived were all sterile and unable to reproduce. The experiment had to end there because there was no fourth generation of cats fed on pasteurized milk. Take note of the fact that even newborn calves fed on pasteurized milk, taken from their own mother, cows, usually die within 6 months, a fact which the commercial dairy industry doesn't want to admit. Despite such scientific evidence in favor of raw milk and against pasteurized milk, and despite the fact that until the 20th century the human species thrived on milk, it is actually illegal to sell raw milk to consumers in all but a few states in America today. It is far more profitable for the dairy industry to pasteurize milk to extend its shelf life, though such denatured milk does nothing whatsoever to extend human life. Furthermore, pasteurization renders milk from sick cows in unsanitary dairies relatively harmless by killing some, but not all, dangerous germs, and this too cuts costs for the dairy industry. It required only 3 generations of Dr. Pottinger's pasteurized milk-fed cats to become sterile and weak. That's about how many generations of Americans and Europeans have fed on pasteurized milk. Today, infertility has become a major problem in young American couples while calcium deficiency has become so rampant that over 90% of all American children suffer chronic tooth decay. To make things worse, milk is now routinely homogenized to prevent the cream from separating from the milk. This involves the fragmentation and pulverization of the fat molecules to the point that they will not separate from the rest of the milk. But it also permits these tiny fragments of milk fat to easily pass through the villi of the small intestine, greatly increasing the amount of denatured fat and cholesterol absorbed by the body. In fact, you absorb more milk fat from homogenized milk than you do from pure cream. Women worried about osteoporosis should take note of these facts about pasteurized milk products. That such denatured milk does not deliver sufficient calcium to prevent this condition is abundantly evident from the fact that American women who consume great quantities of various pasteurized milk products suffer the world's highest incidence of osteoporosis. Raw cabbage, for example, supplies far more assimilable calcium than any quantity of pasteurized milk, yogurt, cottage cheese, or any other denatured dairy product. Recent studies at the Human Research Center in Grand Forks, North Dakota, indicates that the element boron is also an essential factor in absorbing calcium from food and utilizing it to build bones. Even more noteworthy, the level of estrogen in the blood of women, given sufficient quantities of boron, more than doubled, eliminating the need for estrogen replacement therapy, which is a common stopgap measure against osteoporosis in the West. And where do we find boron? In fresh fruits and vegetables, especially apples, pears, grapes, nuts, cabbage, and other leafy vegetables, where we also find calcium. Nature has already provided abundant sources of all the vital nutrients we need in synergistic form. But man insists on cooking and processing them to death, and then wonders why his diet doesn't work. Adults should seriously reconsider milk as a constituent to their daily diets, unless they are able to obtain raw certified milk, which is an excellent food. To stuff children with pasteurized milk in order to make them grow strong and healthy is sheer folly, because they simply cannot assimilate the nutrients. Indeed, men, women, and children alike should eliminate all pasteurized dairy products from their diets, for these denatured dairy products only gum up the intestines with layer upon layer of slimy sludge that interferes with the absorption of organic nutrients. The rule here is to eliminate pasteurized and homogenized milk entirely from your diet. If raw certified milk is available, consume it as a whole food in itself, not in combination with other foods. And the last group is, can you guess it? Desserts. One should avoid any sort of dessert after a big meal, for this type of food combines poorly with everything. Even fresh fruit should be avoided right after a big meal, because it will back up the stomach and ferment instead of digest. If you really have a sweet tooth and crave cakes, pies, and pastries, indulge your habit occasionally by making a whole meal of them. They are still not good for you, but at least taken alone, they will not cause as much gastric distress and toxic byproducts as when taken after meals. The rule is to avoid sweet, starchy desserts, as well as fruits, after large meals of protein or carbohydrates. Correctly combining foods makes all the difference in the world for proper health, digestion, and metabolism. Without complete digestion, the nutrients of even the most wholesome foods cannot be extracted and assimilated by the body. Moreover, incomplete digestion and inefficient metabolism are the prime causes of fat and cholesterol in the body. A low-calorie diet of overcooked, processed, and improperly combined foods may still make you fat and leave sticky deposits in your arteries, just as the wrong mix of fuels will leave carbon deposits on the sparks of the engine, clog the pistons, and create foul gaseous exhaust. On the other hand, if foods are properly combined for consumption, then regardless of how many calories or how much cholesterol they contain, they will not make you fat or clog up your veins and organs, especially if at least half of your daily food intake is taken raw. Please consider all of this if you wish to live a long and healthy life and grow tall as this ancient tree which takes good care of its eternally flowering spring.